Cycling is one of the few sports that manages to mix in both tragedy and victory. This is more prominent during international events such as the Tour de France, where riders push their bodies to their limit and athletes from almost every country choose to risk it all for the reward, even their bodies just for a chance at making history. Though not all these risks end with a reward. Let's take a look at some of the worst crashes we've seen in history. The Jamaluddin Abdujaparov, 1991. DJA, as he's famously known because of his super long name, attempted to win the points classification twice, once in 1991 and then again in 1993, winning both. Though his first win ended quite painfully with him crashing in the final stages of the race in Paris's famous Champs-Élysées, just 100 meters before the finish line. He slammed into the barriers and flew through the air in a way that would give Tom Daley a run for his money. Fortunately, he still had enough points racked up by then to win green jersey, but he had to cross the line to get it. This led to his team members picking up and helping him to struggle to get back on his bike. He then proceeded to slowly make his way to the finish line with medical staff walking next to him the entire time. Secondly, Giuseppe Guerini, 1999. While in some ways crashing in the world's largest race might have been tolerable, crashing in the Tour de France because of a spectator is truly one of the most frustrating ways to get out. Turns out this was exactly what happened to Guerini, and inducting him into the most terrifying cycling crashes in history. He fell because a person from the crowd emerged from the barrier just as he was approaching the final few meters of the 10th stage back in 1999. In the final moments of the stage, an onlooker stepped onto the course, trying to take a picture, and ended up hitting the rider, though he was able to get back up and continue the race. This ended with Richard Virenque winning a King of the Mountains jersey, and gave a chance to Lance Armstrong to win, and EPO himself to his very first title and his iconic climb up Alpe d'Huez. Moreover, Laurent Jalabert, 1994. It's extremely rare to see a crash that's so bad it makes the cyclist in it question their life, and if they should ever ride again. That's exactly what happened to Laurent Jalabert back in 1994 at the Tour de France. He was a sprinter at the time, but the crash ended up changing everything. From riding as an all-rounder who mainly focused on one-day races and tours, to someone who would always avoid sprinting to a finish. The rider collided with a policeman who was leaning onto the track and ended up hitting several riders near the end of the stage. Jalabert was flung onto the ground. His bike was an absolute wreck, and more blood gushing out of him than you'd ever seen at a cycling event. The player fractured his cheekbone and had to promise his wife that he'd change his approach to his sport, which he did. Coming up, Bernard Hinault, 1985. With him already winning the title of the Tour de France 4 times, you'd think that Bernard would be done with the sport since he had nothing left to prove. But he still went for a 5th attempt at the title. The French athlete was on his way to almost winning yet again, but ended up being a part of one of the worst crashes in the Tour de France's history. As stage 14 was about to end, while he was chasing after Greg LeMond for the finish line, he ended up getting tangled up in a 5-man crash. The cyclist needed immediate medical treatment. Despite this, he only took the essentials from the medical team and rode to the finish just to keep that yellow jersey that he could keep for the rest of the tour despite his nose now being in pieces. Furthermore, Johnny Hogeland, 2011. We'd recommend you look away. Just reading about this brutal crash in the Tour de France is enough to make anyone nauseous. Eternal rivalry between cars and cyclists is nothing unheard of, but you would assume that an event like this wouldn't happen, at least the biggest cycling event in the world. Unfortunately, back in 2011, Johnny Hogeland and Juan Antonio Flecha both were knocked into a barbed wire fence by a car that was passing by. The crash ended up leaving him with a long-lasting back pain and insomnia, but also it put an end to his chance at winning a King of the Mountain jersey that he'd already secured on the 6th stage and kept through the 7th, losing it in the next one and finally getting it back just before the accident took place. Hogeland still finished the stage despite him losing 17 full minutes after the crash. The cyclist continued to finish the tour and still rides for Team Rumpa. Moving on to Joseba Bellocchi, 2003. Joseba Bellocchi, the Spanish road cyclist, was with his team when they were chasing down Alexander Vinokurov, who then went on to be the Olympic road cycling gold medalist in 2012. While this was going on, Bellocchi came across a hairpin bend that sent him flying. While Bellocchi may have finished in 2nd place in Tour de France 2002, he was just 40 seconds away from the first position this time behind Lance Armstrong. That was until a devastating heat wave hit the tarmac in front of him, and with Armstrong riding his tail in between a high-speed descent, he ended up crashing brutally. The rider fractured his femur, elbow, and wrist in the process, leaving him unable to ride for a while. The only positive thing that we can derive from this was that Armstrong was forced to ride his way through a field and carry his bike over a ditch, taking up a lot of his time, and even though he won the race, he was unable to win the title. Let's talk about Wim van Est, 1951. Let's take a look at Wim van Est's crash back in 1951, considered one of the worst crashes in cycling history, and as a surprise to no one, also took place during the Tour de France when he fell into a rocky ravine. The Dutch rider was the first from his country to win a yellow jersey, one that he won in 1951, though he did end up being the first and only rider overall to fall down a ravine full of rocks while wearing it. Though it wasn't something he could have avoided since it happened because of a flat tire and a huge slip. The ravine itself was 70 meters deep and Wim was not wearing a helmet. Though as you would expect from someone who survived World War II, he didn't struggle with it and came back unscathed. He climbed right back up and was on the road again to the hospital. Similarly, Jens Voigt, 2009. Possibly the most horrifying crash on the list, Voigt got into a crash as he was descending the famous Col du Petit Saint Bernard, making it one that fans would never forget. He was traveling at over 60 miles per hour as his front wheel hit a big bump on the road that sent him flying with his face first over the handlebars with a motorcycle just barely missing him. The camera caught the rider lying completely still for several minutes and left people holding their breath, absolutely terrified. But thankfully, he survived, but he did end up fracturing his cheekbone and was left with a severe concussion. Additionally, Marcus Burghardt, 2007. Though this crash may not be all that traumatic, it ended up happening because of a dog. The dog was really cute, if we're being honest, and it wouldn't be fair to put him on a list of the scariest crashes in cycling history, but it's worth mentioning that Marcus Burghardt snapped his front wheel in half because of a golden retriever. To our relief, both the dog and the cyclist were fine. We were able to see both of them interact after the crash, and the camera followed the dog as he was taken off the track. As for Marcus, the story wasn't over just yet. He had injured himself trying to swerve and was seen falling flat on his knees. Lastly, Chris Froome, 2014. This one might be tough for fans of Team Sky and supporters from Britain. We're taking a look at the Olympic road cyclist Chris Froome now. He was trying to defend his yellow jersey that he won in 2013's Tour de France, and everyone thought he would be able to pull it off. Sadly, he had to abandon the tour because of cuts on his wrists and legs, and him going down twice in the 5th stage. To his credit, he did then win the tour twice after that. That's a wrap for this video. What crash do you think is the scariest? Let us know in the comments below. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. See you at the next one.